I still have that citation folded up in a drawer somewhere. $5,500 wasn't enough to ruin anybody's life, but it was enough to tell me exactly who I was dealing with. The funny thing is, when that notice landed in my hand, I wasn't angry. Not at first. I was confused, then curious. Then, somewhere between a county records website and a property deed nobody thought anyone would ever read, I became the legal owner of an entire lake and accidentally helped remove the most powerful person in our neighborhood. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 59 years old, retired from 32 years as a civil engineer, and if you'd asked any of my neighbors a year ago what kind of man I was, they would have told you I was boring in the most respectable way possible. I mowed my lawn every Thursday morning, waved at people when they drove past, returned borrowed tools cleaner than I got them, and spent every Saturday at the edge of Hollow Pine Lake with a fishing rod in one hand and coffee in the other. That's all I wanted. Peace, quiet, and a few hours away from television. Hollow Pine Lake sat behind our subdivision, Willow Creek Ridge, a place full of tidy homes, golf carts, and people who cared a little too much about what color mailbox post you installed. Most folks treated the lake like community space. Kids chased frogs along the shoreline. Retirees walked the path at sunset. Teenagers occasionally snuck out there with guitars when they thought nobody was watching. For years, nobody questioned it. Then came Veronica Steele. Veronica was president of the Homeowners Association and carried herself less like an elected volunteer and more like the governor of a very small country. She had a sharp voice, perfectly styled silver hair, and a habit of speaking through people instead of to them. If a trash can sat outside 20 minutes too long, Veronica knew. If someone painted a fence the wrong shade of beige, Veronica knew. If your Christmas lights stayed up until January 10th instead of January 5th, Veronica definitely knew. Looking back, I think what she loved wasn't order. It was authority. Some people enjoy solving problems. Veronica enjoyed reminding people she could create them. The morning everything started looked completely ordinary. I was sitting in my old folding chair near the eastern bank, watching the water ripple under a pale spring sunrise when I heard footsteps coming down the gravel path. I looked over and saw Veronica approaching with her secretary, a thin, nervous man named Leonard Pike carrying a clipboard against his chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. Veronica stopped in front of me, folded her arms, and smiled the kind of smile that usually comes right before bad news. "Mr. Walker," she said, "you are currently in violation of Section 8.2 regarding unauthorized recreational use of community resources." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Leonard handed me a document. There it was in bold red letters. "Fine due, $550. Fishing without a valid recreational permit," Veronica said. "Permit." I actually laughed. I've lived here 12 years. The rule has always existed. Then why has nobody mentioned it in 12 years? Her expression tightened. Whether residents choose to follow regulations is not my responsibility. Now, I should probably tell you something about myself. Engineers spend decades learning to trust details more than confidence. Confidence lies all the time. Measurements don't. Documents don't. Numbers don't. So instead of arguing, I asked one simple question. Can you show me documentation proving the HOA owns this lake? The smile disappeared. Just for a second. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. Veronica recovered quickly. The lake is community property. Okay, I said. Then there should be paperwork. She stared at me, then turned around and walked away without answering. Most people would have paid the fine. Maybe complained over dinner. Maybe rolled their eyes and moved on. I almost did. But that evening I sat at my kitchen table, unfolded the citation, and noticed something strange. The location field was incomplete. No parcel number. No legal description. No assessor identification. Just the words lake area. To most people that would have meant nothing. To me it was like finding a missing bolt in a bridge support. Small details matter because they reveal bigger problems. I pulled out my original home purchase documents and started reading. Then I opened county property records. Then I opened archived development filings. Midnight came and went. Around 1:30 in the morning, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Because according to county records, Willow Creek Ridge HOA didn't own Hollow Pine Lake. Not even a little. And when I realized who did, everything changed. The next morning I skipped breakfast, poured a second cup of coffee, and sat back down at my computer. I told myself I was only going to spend 30 minutes looking through records. 3 hours later I was still there. What started as curiosity had turned into something else entirely because the deeper I dug, the stranger the story became. Hollow Pine Lake wasn't listed under the Homeowners Association. It wasn't listed under any municipal agency. It wasn't even listed under the original developer anymore. The parcel belonged to a company called Northstar Development Holdings, and according to state records, that company had been dissolved nearly 5 years earlier. I remember staring at the screen thinking, that can't be right. A lake doesn't just get forgotten. A parking lot maybe. An empty lot on the edge of town maybe. But a lake? Yet there it was. Every document pointed to the same conclusion. When Willow Creek Ridge was built back in 2002, the developer transferred roads, green spaces, and community facilities to the HOA. Everything except the lake. Somehow the parcel had remained under corporate ownership. Then the company disappeared. Nobody noticed. Nobody questioned it. And apparently nobody checked. I spent the rest of the day assembling documents the same way I used to assemble engineering reports. One file led to another. One signature led to another. By dinner, I had built a timeline spanning 20 years. The Homeowners Association had no deed, no easement, no management agreement, no legal authority, nothing. Yet Veronica had been enforcing rules around the lake for years. That bothered me more than the fine itself. Mistakes happen, but people don't usually create entire systems of authority by accident. Around 7 that evening, I called my son, Ryan. Ryan was a property attorney in Denver. Smart kid. Smarter than I was at his age. After listening to my explanation, he was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "Dad, are you absolutely sure about these records? Check them twice. And the HOA never owned the parcel? Not according to anything I've found." Another pause. Then I heard him laugh. "Well, that's interesting. Interesting good or interesting dangerous? Interesting actionable." That word stayed in my head all night. Actionable. The following afternoon, I met with a local attorney named Melissa Grant. I'd never hired a lawyer before outside routine paperwork. Frankly, I wasn't the suing type. Melissa spent nearly an hour reviewing everything I'd gathered. At one point, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. "Mr. Walker, most people come in after receiving an HOA fine and bring emotions. You brought evidence. Is that good? It's unusual." Then she told me something that changed everything. The dissolved company still had a legal representative handling residual assets, meaning the lake technically remained available for transfer, meaning ownership could potentially be purchased, meaning there was a legal path forward. I drove home that afternoon feeling strangely calm. Not excited, not angry, calm. Like I had finally located the foundation beneath a house everyone else assumed was floating. Meanwhile, Veronica was becoming increasingly aggressive. 3 days later, the HOA distributed a compliance bulletin to every household. My name wasn't highlighted in giant letters, but it might as well have been. The notice referenced repeated violations, failure to cooperate, and community resource misuse. It never mentioned the ownership issue. Not once. A few neighbors called. Some sounded concerned. Others sounded suspicious. I gave everyone the same answer. "I'm reviewing records." That became my favorite sentence. Because it was true and because it frustrated people who wanted drama. Veronica wanted a fight. I wanted documentation. 2 days later, Melissa called. I could tell from her voice she had found something important. "You're sitting down, right?" she asked. "Should I be? I found correspondence from 3 years ago." My stomach tightened. "What kind of correspondence?" "A request submitted by the HOA." I sat very still. Melissa continued. "Someone representing the Homeowners Association contacted the dissolved company's legal administrator asking for transfer rights to the lake. Transfer rights. Management authority. Control. Access oversight. What happened? Nothing. The request was denied. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the obvious question. Who signed it? Melissa sighed. Veronica Steele. I walked outside after that phone call and stood on my back patio, staring across the water. The late afternoon sun reflected off the lake in bright flashes. Kids were riding bicycles near the trail. A couple walked their dog beside the shoreline. Everything looked peaceful, normal. But suddenly I could see the whole picture. Veronica already knew. Years earlier, she had discovered the HOA didn't own the lake. She had tried to gain authority legally. Failed. Then continued acting as though authority existed anyway. That wasn't confusion. That wasn't misunderstanding. That was a choice. And for some reason, that realization made me more disappointed than angry. Power does strange things to people. Most of us think corruption starts with huge decisions. It usually doesn't. It starts with tiny compromises repeated over time until somebody forgets where the truth ended and convenience began. A week later, Melissa called again. I have a number. A number? The estate wants to sell. I looked out my kitchen window. How much? She told me. I honestly thought she had forgotten a digit. The parcel wasn't cheap, but it wasn't remotely as expensive as anyone would expect for a private lake. Years of unpaid taxes had become a burden. The estate wanted closure. There were no competing buyers, no pending claims, no HOA rights, just paperwork waiting for someone willing to finish it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing through the house, asking myself the same question. Was I really considering buying an entire lake because someone handed me a ridiculous fine? The answer was no. Not exactly. The fine started the process. But this had become something bigger. I wasn't trying to punish Veronica. I wasn't chasing revenge. I wanted clarity. Ownership should be clear. Rules should be honest. Authority should be real. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I finally sat down and made my decision. The next day, I met Melissa at her office. She slid the purchase documents across the table. Last chance to back out. I looked at the stack of papers. Then I looked out the window. Then I signed. Just like that. 20 years of assumptions changed hands through a few signatures and a wire transfer. 3 weeks later, the county officially recorded the deed. Hollow Pine Lake belonged to me. Not the HOA. Not the board. Not Veronica Steele. Me. I remember driving around the shoreline that afternoon, windows down, listening to nothing but wind and tires. For the first time, I understood something important. Veronica's biggest mistake wasn't issuing the fine. It wasn't even pretending she controlled property she didn't own. Her biggest mistake was assuming nobody would ever check. Because once the truth starts moving, it becomes very difficult to stop. And the truth was about to arrive right on her front doorstep. The first sign went up on a Wednesday morning. I was sitting in my usual folding chair near the shoreline when the survey crew finished placing the final boundary marker and the installation team bolted a large sign beside the trail entrance. It wasn't dramatic. No flashing lights. No giant fence. Just simple black lettering on a white background. Private property. Owner, Ethan Walker. Access by permission. That's all it said. I took a sip of coffee and waited. It didn't take long. Around noon, a black SUV came flying down the road so fast, I thought somebody was having a medical emergency. The driver's door opened before the vehicle fully stopped. Veronica stepped out and marched toward me like a woman storming a battlefield. "What is this?" she demanded. I looked up from my fishing rod. A sign. "Remove it." "Why?" Her face turned red. "Because this is HOA property." I stood slowly and smiled. "No, Veronica, it isn't." 30 minutes later, she was sitting at my dining room table staring at a recorded county deed with my name printed across the ownership line. She read it once, then again, then a third time. The confidence she'd carried for years seemed to drain away right in front of me. "This can't be correct," she whispered. "County records disagree. The community has used that lake for decades. Using something doesn't make you the owner." For the first time since I'd known her, Veronica had no response. She simply stood up and walked out. But people like Veronica rarely accept defeat quietly. Within days, she launched a campaign across the neighborhood message boards claiming a community asset had been stolen through legal loopholes. Carefully cropped photographs appeared online. Posts questioned my motives. Rumors spread. Some neighbors believed her. Others didn't know what to think. One anonymous note appeared beneath my front door telling me to give the lake back. I saved it. Engineers save evidence. Instead of arguing, I posted documents. The deed. The assessor records. The original property filings. No speeches. No insults. Just facts. And something interesting happened. The more documentation people saw, the more questions they asked. Specifically one question. If Veronica was telling the truth, where were her documents? That question became impossible to answer because the answer didn't exist. A few weeks later, the situation exploded. I'd installed security cameras around the shoreline mostly as a precaution. One night around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and saw 2 figures moving through the darkness. One was pulling up survey markers. The other was spray painting over a property sign. I called the police and watched everything unfold through 6 camera angles. When patrol officers arrived, the 2 men turned out to be Leonard Pike and the adult son of another HOA board member. The footage was crystal clear. The arrests happened that night. The story spread through Willow Creek Ridge by breakfast. Suddenly, the conversation changed. People stopped asking why I bought the lake and started asking why HOA leadership was sneaking onto private property after midnight. That's when the entire structure began collapsing. Residents demanded records. Meetings became arguments. Questions multiplied. 11 formal complaints were filed against Veronica. During one packed community meeting, a retired accountant stood up and asked the question that finally ended her reign. Can you produce a single document proving HOA ownership of the lake? Veronica talked about tradition, stewardship, expectations, community understanding. But she never produced a document because there wasn't one to produce. 3 months later, homeowners voted to remove her from office. The margin wasn't even close. A new board was elected shortly afterward, led by a neighbor named Marcus Reynolds, a practical guy who cared more about solving problems than creating them. Marcus came to my house one afternoon carrying a folder and a peace offering in the form of barbecue from a local restaurant. We sat on the patio overlooking the water and worked out something simple. The lake would remain private property. Residents could continue enjoying it free of charge under a written access agreement. Walking, fishing, kayaking, family picnics, all allowed. Everything clear, everything documented, everything legal. 6 months after receiving that ridiculous $550 citation, I found myself back in the same folding chair beside the same water. The sunset painted the lake gold. Kids laughed near the shoreline. Marcus was fishing 20 feet away. The neighborhood felt calmer than it had in years. Funny enough, almost nothing looked different. The only real change was that the truth had finally caught up with reality. A few months later, Veronica sold her house and moved away. I watched the moving truck leave from my kitchen window while holding the original citation in my hand. The paper that started everything. Looking back, I don't think this story was ever really about fishing. It wasn't even about a lake. It was about what happens when authority stops being accountable. It's about the difference between rules and ownership, between confidence and proof, between assumptions and facts. Most people would have paid that fine and moved on. Maybe I should have. Maybe life would have been easier. But then again, sometimes the smallest detail changes everything. One missing parcel number, one unanswered question, one document nobody expected anyone to read. So now I'm curious what you think. Did I do the right thing by buying the lake? Or should I have found another way to handle it? Was Veronica protecting the community in her own misguided way? Or was she abusing power from the beginning? Let me know in the comments, because stories like this always seem to divide people right down the middle. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a property dispute, or someone who thought authority mattered more than facts, I'd love to hear your story too.